Marianne Keller was in her 70s, living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Vienna, a city once celebrated as the crown jewel of Europe, filled with ornate buildings and the lingering echoes of symphonies drifting through its squares. Outwardly, she appeared to be the picture of calm, a gentle face framed by silver hair, pale blue eyes carrying a distant sadness. But behind that facade of serenity lay a lifetime of sacrifice, a chain of years endured in silence, weighed down by injustice, and injustice dealt not by strangers, but by the very family she had poured her heart and soul into. From the outside, people assumed she was blessed. A grown son, a young daughter-in-law, a comfortable life in a cultured city. Neighbors would say, "Marianne is lucky. Her son has a good life. She won't be lonely." But the truth behind closed doors was the exact opposite. The very people who should have been her refuge in old age were the ones who turned her into a ghost, in her own family. And the most painful part, Marianne kept swallowing her bitterness, convinced that someday, just someday, the bonds of blood would soften her son's heart. Jonas Keller, her only son, now 35, had once been a boy who clung to her whenever thunder rattled the windows. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man hardened by selfishness, blind to anything but his own convenience. Jonas rarely bothered to ask a simple question, "Mom, how are you?" But he never forgot to remind her about rent money, or the bills that needed paying, or the latest expense that had to be covered. To him, her support wasn't an act of love, it was an obligation, a never-ending duty. Sophia Hartman, the daughter-in-law Marianne had once tried to welcome with open arms, was worse still. She had a talent for sweetness in public, every word dipped in honey when others were watching. But in private, with her mother-in-law, she was a master manipulator. Every phone call carried the same undertone. "We need money. Rent, groceries, hospital bills, birthdays, furniture." Not once did Sophia ever call to share joy, to ask about Marianne's health, or simply to say she cared. Her affection only appeared when she needed Marianne's wallet. What burns the heart most is the sheer unfairness of it all. For nearly 4 years, Marianne had bled her savings dry, pulling from the nest egg her late husband had left behind the money that was supposed to secure her retirement, to let her live peacefully in her later years. Instead, over 40,000 euros had been siphoned away to fund Jonas and Sophia's lifestyle. The rent for their stylish apartment in Vienna's priciest district, the sleek leather sofa Sophia had insisted upon, the emergency vacations, the endless little luxuries. Every last cent came from Marianne's account. And what did she receive in return? Not gratitude, not warmth, only disregard. Only erasure. Marianne had once dreamed that her son's wedding would be the happiest day of her life. She pictured herself in an elegant dress, seated proudly among family, watching Jonas walk down the aisle. She had even prepared a small wooden box filled with childhood photos of him, ready to present as a keepsake on his wedding day. But all those dreams were shattered in a single, cold sentence from Sophia. "We already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Special people. The word sliced through Marianne's heart like a blade. Had she not spent decades sacrificing for Jonas? Had she not carried his burdens, given up her comfort, emptied her savings to keep him afloat? Yet, when the most sacred day arrived, she was told without hesitation that she was not special, and the insult deepened. Though she had been cast aside, the photos appeared online for the world to see. Sophia's parents, radiant in formal wear, standing proudly beside the bride and groom. Her siblings raising champagne flutes in celebration. Sophia herself, glowing in a white dress Marianne had partly paid for, shimmering beneath the lights. Meanwhile, Marianne sat in her small apartment, staring at the dress she had bought for herself, an outfit meant for her son's wedding day, still hanging untouched in her closet, a cruel reminder of her place in their lives. Not family, only financier. For any woman reading this, the outrage is immediate. What mother deserves this? Who could bear the humiliation of being erased from her own child's life after giving so much? To be told she was not special after pouring out everything she had? The injustice is unbearable, the insult beyond comprehension. And yet, for Marianne, this was not a single blow. It was the culmination of years of being used, ignored, and treated as if her love was a burden and her money was the only thing of value. She had grown old believing her role was to give, always give, never ask. She had confused love with sacrifice, affection with financial support. Now, as the cruelty of her exclusion sunk in, a fire stirred within her chest. This was not just disappointment. This was betrayal. Vienna's cobblestone streets, once symbols of beauty, now felt like prison bars around her. The city of waltzes and glittering ballrooms could not hide the truth. Marianne Keller had been cast aside by her own son. She was not family. She was not cherished. She was not even invited. She was simply useful. But usefulness has an expiration date. And deep down, Marianne knew, if she didn't draw the line now, she would be drained completely of her money, her dignity, and her last chance at freedom. For nearly 4 long years, Marianne Keller had lived like a shadow in her own life. Every month followed the same ritual: the rent transfer for Jonas, and Sophia's apartment in Vienna's prestigious 5th district, the grocery bills she quietly paid. The little extras slipped into envelopes when Sophia hinted about needing just a bit more. It was a cycle so regular, so predictable, that even the bank manager knew her by name and would greet her with a sympathetic smile whenever she came in to arrange another transfer. And yet, Marianne never complained. She told herself, "This is what mothers do. This is my duty." It was easier to believe that lie than to confront the emptiness gnawing inside her. The numbers were staggering. Nearly €1,200 a month for rent and utilities. Another €400 to €500 on food and daily expenses. And then the endless stream of emergencies. A medical bill here, a car repair there, birthday gifts, holiday surprises. In total, more than €40,000 had left her savings account. €40,000 that her late husband, Friedrich, had left for her to grow old with dignity and peace. Instead, it had become the lifeline for 2 adults perfectly capable of supporting themselves but unwilling to try. Marianne remembered nights when she ate nothing but bread and soup so she could send Jonas and Sophia the money they demanded. She remembered canceling her own doctor's appointments because there wasn't enough left this month. She remembered looking at a travel brochure for Prague, a trip she had dreamed of for years, and quietly tucking it back into the drawer because Sophia's medical treatment had to come first. Every sacrifice was wrapped in hope. Hope that one day Jonas would look at her with gratitude. Hope that Sophia would welcome her into the family as a true mother. Hope that her love would be enough. But gratitude never came. Jonas, her only son, had become entitled, demanding. He no longer asked politely. He expected. When Marianne transferred money late, his voice on the phone grew sharp, impatient, laced with irritation. "Mom, you forgot. We're already behind on rent." Forgot? As if her entire life revolved only around serving his needs. And Sophia. Oh, Sophia was clever. Her voice could melt into honey when she wanted something. "Marianne, you're like a second mother to me. I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words, so carefully chosen, pierced Marianne's heart and left her believing that maybe, just maybe, she was loved. But the sweetness lasted only as long as the transfers cleared. Once the money was secured, Sophia's tone cooled. Days would pass without so much as a hello, until the next emergency rose. The truth was undeniable. They didn't call her for love. They called her for money. What made it even more unbearable was the contrast between Marianne's life and theirs. While she wore old coats she had kept for a decade, Sophia flaunted new designer dresses, while Marianne clipped grocery coupons to stretch her pension. Jonas drove a sleek car whose monthly insurance she had helped cover, and while she sat alone in her quiet apartment, they posted photos of fine dinners, champagne toasts, and weekend getaways, all funded by her sacrifices. Is it any wonder that resentment began to boil inside her? And yet, Marianne kept giving, because deep down, she feared something worse than poverty. She feared abandonment. She believed that if she stopped helping, she would lose Jonas completely. She would become irrelevant, forgotten. The boy who once clung to her during thunderstorms would finally let go. So she gave more, and more, and more. Hey, there were moments when her body betrayed her exhaustion. She would wake up in the middle of the night with chest tightness, not knowing whether it was fear or heartbreak. She would sit at her kitchen table staring at her late husband's photograph, whispering, "Friedrich, am I doing the right thing? Or am I destroying myself for a love that doesn't exist?" The apartment around her bore the marks of sacrifice. The walls hadn't been repainted in years. The refrigerator often stood half empty. The shoes by the door were worn thin. And yet, in Jonas and Sophia's home, bought furniture gleamed like new. The fridge overflowed, and every corner reflected her silent labor. Still, Marianne told herself it was worth it. Worth it to see her son secure. Worth it to believe she mattered. But the cracks grew wider each year. She noticed how Jonas avoided introducing her to friends, how Sophia never invited her to family dinners with her side of the family. She noticed how conversations with her son became shorter, colder, focused only on logistics. "Did you make the transfer? How much is left? When can you send more?" Not once did they ask about her day, her health, her dreams. And in those moments of painful clarity, Marianne realized she wasn't a mother in their eyes. She was an account balance. She could still remember the exact day she calculated everything. Sitting at her dining table, she wrote down every transfer, every gift, every emergency payment. When she added it all up, 40,000 euros, her hands trembled. That was not love. That was exploitation. And worse, she had allowed it. Tears fell, but they were not the tears of weakness she was used to. They were tears of fury, of betrayal, of awakening. She thought of the friends she no longer saw because she was always too busy helping Jonas and Sophia. She thought of the hobbies she had abandoned: painting, gardening, reading, because every euro spent on herself was a euro less for them. She thought of her late husband's promise: "Marianne, this money is for you. Live freely, travel, enjoy your old age." And she realized she had broken that promise, not to him, but to herself. Sacrifice had become slavery. For years, Marianne had mistaken obedience for love. But love should never require a woman to bankrupt herself, to erase herself, to beg for scraps of affection. Love should never feel like a transaction. And as that truth settled deep into her heart, the outrage grew too strong to ignore. Something had to change. Marianne Keller had lived her life believing that some moments were sacred. The birth of her son, his first steps, his first day of school, and one day, she thought, his wedding. She had imagined that milestone 1,000 times. The music filling the hall, the glow of candles, the tender moment when her son would turn to her and smile, acknowledging everything she had done to bring him to that day. For months, she had carefully planned what she would wear. A soft rose-colored dress hung in her closet, chosen not for extravagance but for elegance. She had polished her shoes, prepared a small speech in her mind, something simple, heartfelt, about how proud she was of Jonas. She even found an old wooden box where she had gathered photographs of his childhood. The little boy clinging to her hand at the zoo, the teenager practicing piano, the shy young man leaving for his first job interview. She pictured herself giving him that box, a symbol of a mother's devotion carried across decades. But all of that shattered with a single phone call. Sophia's voice, sweet and casual, drifted through the receiver. "Oh, Marianne, we already got married yesterday. It was a small, intimate ceremony. We only invited special people." Special people. The words echoed in her ears, louder than thunder, sharper than glass. Marianne froze. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. She pressed the phone closer to her ear, her heart hammering. "What do you mean? Yesterday? Why? Why wasn't I told?" Sophia's tone didn't waver. It was smooth, almost rehearsed. "It was very last minute, you know. Only immediate family. My parents, my siblings, people closest to us. We didn't want a big crowd. Immediate family, closest to us." And yet Marianne, his mother, was nowhere in that circle. She hung up the phone slowly, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it. The room seemed to tilt around her. The walls of her little apartment, once comforting, now pressed in like a cage. She staggered to the closet, opened the door, and stared at the rose-colored dress. It hung there silently, useless, mocking in that instant. Something inside her cracked. The next morning, photos began appearing online. She hadn't wanted to look, but they were everywhere, forwarded by acquaintances, popping up on social media. Jonas in a sleek black suit, beaming beside Sophia in a gown Marianne herself had helped pay for. Sophia's parents stood proudly at their side, champagne glasses raised. Laughter, flowers, candles, music, the celebration Marianne had dreamed of. And yet she wasn't there. Her eyes filled with tears as she scrolled. Each photo stabbed deeper. There was Jonas, cutting the cake. Jonas dancing with Sophia's mother. Jonas toasting with Sophia's father. Marianne searched desperately for even a hint of herself in that night. A place set at a table. A mention in the captions. A trace of recognition. There was nothing. She had been erased, as if she had never existed. She laid the phone down and pressed her face into her hands. The betrayal was suffocating. How could her son, her boy, the child she had carried, raised, protected, exclude her so completely? How could he look at her sacrifices and deem her unworthy of being present on the most important day of his life? The humiliation burned. She imagined the whispers among Sophia's family. Where is his mother? Maybe they didn't even ask. Maybe Sophia had already painted her as unnecessary, inconvenient, better left in the shadows. And the cruelty of it all was sharpened by memory. Only weeks earlier, Sophia had sweetly asked for help paying for a few wedding details. Marianne had scraped together extra euros, skipping meals, quietly canceling her own small pleasures, believing she was contributing to a celebration she would share in. And yet, those very euros had purchased the flowers, the music, the gown that adorned a night from which she was barred. Is there a deeper insult? To be told you are not special enough to witness the union of your own child, yet to know your money flowed into every detail of that night. Marianne sat at her kitchen table, staring at the wooden box she had prepared with old photographs. Her hand brushed across the lid, trembling. Those images told the story of a mother's devotion. Scraped knees she had bandaged, birthday cakes she had baked, tears she had wiped away. Now, they seemed like relics from a different life, evidence of a bond she realized might have died long ago. Her grief deepened into fury, tears streamed down her face. But they no longer felt like weakness. They burned, hot and relentless, like acid. Each drop carried years of sacrifice turned to dust, years of love repaid with silence, years of dignity stripped away. She clenched her hands into fists. The knuckles whitened, the veins rose. This was not simply sadness, it was outrage, a primal scream buried in her chest. She had been used, deceived, discarded, and now, publicly humiliated. The words special people reverberated again, but this time, they no longer pierced her as wounds. They ignited something else, the realization that she was done waiting for gratitude that would never come, done bending herself into pieces for a son who no longer saw her as his mother, but only as a wallet. Marianne rose slowly from the table, her back straighter than it had been in years. The room was dim, but a shaft of cold morning light cut across her face, illuminating the steel now hardening in her eyes. She wasn't defeated, not anymore. The wedding had excluded her, erased her, humiliated her. But in doing so, it had revealed the truth with brutal clarity. She could no longer deny the depth of her exploitation. And that truth, painful as it was, gave her something she hadn't felt in years: resolve. The morning after the phone call, Marianne sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The rose-colored dress still hung in the closet, a silent witness to her humiliation. The wooden box of photographs sat untouched, its contents meaningless now. For hours, she stared at the numbers she had written the night before: the transfers, the gifts, the endless emergencies. 40,000 euros gone. 4 years of her life siphoned into the bottomless pit of Jonas and Sophia's demands. Something hardened inside her. For the first time in years, her thoughts turned not to them, but to herself. She looked at her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, deep wrinkles, but beneath them a spark that refused to die. Enough, she whispered. The word felt foreign, strange on her tongue, but powerful. That afternoon, she dressed carefully and walked to the bank. The clerk, a kind man named Herr Vogel who had seen her countless times before, looked up in surprise. "Frau Keller, here for another transfer?" he asked politely. Marianne shook her head. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "No, I'm here to cancel them. All of them." He blinked, taken aback. "Are you sure? For 4 years these have been regular." "I am sure," she interrupted, more firmly than she expected. "From today, no more. And I'd like to protect my account. No one else must have access to it." As Herr Vogel processed the request, Marianne's phone buzzed again and again. Jonas, then Sophia, then Jonas again. She let it ring. 4 years. Her pulse would have raced at those calls, terrified of disappointing them. But now she let the screen go dark, her silence louder than any answer. When the clerk handed her the cancellation documents, he paused. "Forgive me, Frau Keller, but may I say something? In all these years, I have never seen anyone so generous with her family. You deserve peace." Tears pricked Marianne's eyes. But they were not the tears of despair she had cried the night before. They were tears of release. She left the bank with her shoulders straighter, her step lighter. For the first time in years, her money was truly hers. The change was immediate. That very evening, Jonas showed up at her apartment with Sophia at his side, their faces stormy. They had keys. Marianne had given them keys long ago. believing trust was part of love. When she walked in and saw them waiting, her stomach clenched, but she did not back down. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Jonas's voice cracked with forced calm. "Mom, we heard you canceled the transfers. We need to talk." "We can't just," Sophia cut in, her tone sharp beneath a thin layer of sweetness. "Marianne, you're not thinking clearly. You're under stress. At your age, it's normal to get confused." "We brought someone to help." A man in a suit stepped forward, introducing himself as Dr. Kruger, a family lawyer. He spoke smoothly, his words dripping with practiced concern. "Your children are worried about you, Frau Keller. They fear you're no longer able to manage your finances responsibly. A simple power of attorney would allow them to help." The implication was clear. Sign away her independence, or be declared incapable. For a moment, fear rose in her chest, but then the memory of Sophia's words, "Only special people," burned through her hesitation. "No," Marianne said firmly, her voice steady. "I am not confused. I am clearer than I have been in years. And you will all leave my home. Now." Jonas's face darkened, his voice rising. "Mom, don't be unreasonable. We have obligations, rent, the car, bills. You can't just cut us off." "Who says I can't?" she shot back, her voice trembling not with weakness but with rage. "For years, I paid rent that wasn't mine. I filled a fridge in a house where I wasn't welcome. I financed a life that excluded me. And in return, you erased me from your wedding. I owe you nothing." The lawyer slid a folder across the table, papers ready for her signature. Marianne didn't even glance at them. She picked up the folder and threw it into the trash. "This is my decision," she declared. "And the only transition happening here is yours to the front door." Sophia's eyes narrowed, her mask of sweetness slipping. "You can't do this to us, Marianne. We counted on you. Everything we planned, our future depends on you. Then your future was built on my destruction." Marianne answered coldly. "And that ends today." The three of them left, their dignity wounded, their anger simmering. Jonas turned at the door, his voice thick with threat. "This will end badly for you, Mom. One day you'll be alone, and there will be no one to care for you." Marianne met his gaze with clarity sharper than glass. "I am already alone. The difference is that now it is by my choice, not by your neglect." When the door shut behind them, silence filled the apartment. Not the suffocating silence of abandonment, but the liberating silence of freedom. That night, she couldn't sleep, not from sorrow, but from adrenaline. She lay awake, her mind racing not with fear but with plans. Plans for the locks she would change, the accounts she would secure, the life she would finally begin living for herself. For years she had been a prisoner in her own generosity. Tonight, she had broken free. The next morning, she called a lawyer of her own Hairbauer, a man with a reputation for protecting the elderly. When she explained everything, his expression darkened. "Frau Keller, this is called elder financial abuse. It is more common than you think, and it is a crime. They may try again, but we will protect you." Hearing those words was like breathing air after years underwater. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't abandoning her son. She was saving herself. Later, as she walked home with the morning sun warming her face, Marianne realized something profound. This was the first day in decades that she had woken up thinking about her own life instead of someone else's. For the first time in years, she wasn't an ATM with feelings. She was a woman with dignity, and she would never go back. Marianne thought the storm had passed when she shut the door behind Jonas, Sophia, and the lawyer. The silence afterward felt like freedom, a silence she hadn't heard in years. But freedom, she would soon learn, is never granted easily. Those who depend on exploitation do not give it up without a fight. Within days, the calls began again, first polite, then insistent, then laced with rage. "Mom, answer your phone. We need to talk. Marianne, this isn't fair, you can't just cut us off." The messages poured in, each one more desperate than the last. But Marianne ignored them. For the first time, she realized the power of silence. Sophia, ever the strategist, shifted tactics. Instead of demands, her voice turned surly. "Marianne, let's start over. Come have dinner with us. We'll make it special. We can talk like family again." But Marianne had learned. She could hear the manipulation behind every word. There was no family in Sophia's vocabulary, only financial supply lines. When those attempts failed, the couple escalated. One evening, Marianne returned home to find 3 cars parked outside her house. Jonas and Sophia were waiting inside with another man, older, dressed in gray. Rifling through her papers spread across the dining table. "What is happening here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Sophia rushed forward with her false tenderness. "Marianne, thank goodness you're home. This is Herr Fischer, a family attorney. He's here to help. We're worried about you." "Worried?" Marianne's voice dripped with disbelief. "You break into my home, go through my private documents, and call that worry?" Jonas stepped in, eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and panic. "Mom, listen. You're not yourself lately. Canceling the transfers, shutting us out, it isn't normal. We just want to protect you." Protect. The word nearly made Marianne laugh. Protect her, when they had excluded her from her son's wedding. Protect her, after draining 40,000 euros of her savings. It was not protection, it was possession. Herr Fischer slid a folder across the table. "Frau Keller, this is a simple power of attorney. It will allow your children to manage your finances, just until you feel more stable. It's in your best interest." Marianne looked at the folder for less than a second before scooping it up and tossing it directly into the trash. Her voice, clear and sharp, filled the room. "The only transition happening here is you leaving my house. Now." Sophia's sweetness cracked. Her face twisted, her voice rising in fury. "You can't do this to us. We counted on you. We made plans, our future depends on you. Then your future," Marianne spat, "was built on my destruction. And it ends tonight." Jonas's face reddened, his voice trembling. "Mom, you'll regret this. One day you'll be old and sick and alone. And then what? You think these neighbors or your so-called friends will take care of you? No, it's us. And if you push us away now, you'll die with no one." Marianne's reply was steady, calm, and devastating. "I am already alone, Jonas. But at least now, it is by my choice, not by your neglect." The word silenced even Sophia. For a brief moment, Jonas's eyes flickered not with love, but with recognition of the truth. Then the anger returned. He slammed the door as they left, but Marianne stood tall, unshaken. Yet she knew this was not the end. A few days later, her lawyer, Herr Bauer, confirmed her fears. "Frau Keller, they may attempt something more drastic. If they cannot control you willingly, they might try through the courts. They could attempt to declare you incompetent." The very thought chilled her. To be labeled unfit, stripped of her independence, her dignity handed back into the hands of the very people who had betrayed her, it was unthinkable. And yet, it was exactly what Jonas and Sophia set in motion. They arrived again, this time with papers, threats, and accusations. Sophia, ever the actress, wept crocodile tears. We're only trying to help her, Herr Fischer. She's not well. She's confused, paranoid, isolating herself. She needs us. Marianne watched in silence, her hands clenched on her lap. 4 years, she had walked on eggshells, terrified of offending, desperate for scraps of affection. But now, anger was her armor. You talk of love, Sophia, she said finally, her voice cold as steel. But your love is measured in euros. You talk of care, Jonas, but your care is only for your comfort. I have given you everything. You repaid me with lies, with exclusion, with humiliation. And now you dare to stand here and call me incapable? No more. Sophia's mask cracked again. Her tears turned to venom. This isn't over, Marianne. If you won't give us what we need, the law will force you. We have rights. We will get guardianship if we must. Then fight, Marianne replied. But do it with your own money, because mine is no longer yours. They left in fury, slamming the door behind them once more. But this time, Marianne felt no fear. She had faced their rage and survived. More than that, she had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Still, Herr Bauer's warning echoed in her ears. The battle was only beginning. Jonas and Sophia had shown their true faces. They were willing to tear apart the fabric of family, willing to humiliate her, willing to drag her name into court all for money. And though Marianne's heart ached with grief for the son she thought she had, grief for the illusion of love that had sustained her, it was also filled with fire. She would not surrender, not to them, not to the law, not to the lies. If they wanted a war, she would give them one. After Jonas and Sophia stormed out of her apartment, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled, Marianne Keller sank into her armchair, her chest rising and falling with adrenaline. She had stood her ground. She had refused to sign. She had thrown their lawyer's folder into the trash without hesitation. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. People like Jonas and Sophia didn't give up. They escalated. Her suspicions were confirmed the very next morning when she received a call from her own lawyer, Herr Bauer. He had been recommended by an old acquaintance years ago, but Marianne had never thought she'd need his services. Now, his calm and steady voice was her anchor. Frau Keller, he said, I need you to understand that what your son and daughter-in-law are attempting is not unusual. This is a form of elder financial abuse. They may try to have you declared incompetent to seize control of your assets. But you are not alone. I will help you. The words struck her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time, she felt someone truly saw her not as a wallet, not as an obstacle, but as a person worthy of protection. That afternoon, Marianne sat in Herr Bauer's office, stacks of documents spread across his desk. Together they went through every transfer, every bill, every so-called emergency, line by line. Her generosity was laid bare. When the total came into view, 40,000 euros, Herr Bauer whistled softly. Frau Keller, with this money you could have traveled, renovated your home, lived comfortably. Instead, you financed two adults who excluded you from their wedding. Marianne lowered her head. Shame flushed her cheeks, though she knew she had nothing to be ashamed of. I thought I was buying love, she whispered. Herr Bauer shook his head. No, Marianne, love cannot be bought. And what you gave was not love in return, it was exploitation. But now, we document everything. Every euro, every humiliation. We will not let them win. Leaving his office, Marianne felt lighter, as though she had deposited not just documents but also years of silent pain into his care. Still, the fear lingered. What if Jonas and Sophia came back? What if they forced their way in again? That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow outside her window made her heart race. Finally, at dawn, she resolved, if she was to fight this battle, she needed more than legal protection. She needed to make her home a fortress. She went to the hardware store, a place she hadn't visited in years. The owner, Herr Sommer, recognized her immediately. Frau Keller, what brings you here today? Another emergency for your son? Marianne lifted her chin. No, this time, it's for me. I want to change all the locks. And I want a security system. The best you have. His eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions. While he prepared the locks, his son, Ethan, a young technician, came out from the back. I install security cameras, he said. Marianne felt it was Providence. Then you'll come to my home tomorrow, she replied firmly. As she left the store with the new locks in her bag, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She knew immediately. Sophia. She let it ring once, twice, then picked up, her voice icy. Marianne. Please don't hang up, Sophia began, her tone dripping with false sincerity. We miss you. Let's have dinner together, celebrate the wedding with you properly. We can cook at your house, just like old times. Marianne almost laughed. How much rent do you owe? She asked flatly. The silence on the line was answer enough. Finally, Sophia admitted, 2 months. You're 1,000. Then say it plainly, Marianne snapped. You don't miss me. You miss my money. Sophia's voice cracked, shifting from sweetness to pleading. Both. We love you, but we need your help too. If I were so important, Marianne said coldly, why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why wasn't I important enough to receive a phone call that wasn't about money? When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? The silence stretched, heavy and damning. Marianne hung up before Sophia could reply. That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in years. She walked into a beauty salon. Cynthia, her favorite stylist, gasped, Frau Keller, I thought you had forgotten us. I didn't forget, Marianne said softly. I forgot that I deserved to be here. She treated herself to the full-service cut, color, manicure, pedicure. As Cynthia worked, Marianne felt layers of exhaustion fall away. When she looked in the mirror afterward, she saw not just gray hair and wrinkles, but a woman regaining her dignity. You look beautiful, Cynthia said, smiling. But more than that, you look free. Later that evening, Marianne met her neighbor, Eleanor Brooks, on the front porch. They had lived side by side for years but hardly spoken. Now, Eleanor's eyes filled with concern. I heard shouting the other day. Is everything all right? Marianne invited her in and poured coffee. As she told her story, Eleanor listened quietly, nodding, tears brimming in her eyes. When Marianne finished, Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. You did the right thing, she said firmly. I went through the same with my daughter years ago. She only called when she needed money. I cut her off. It was horrible at first, but eventually she apologized. Now we have a real relationship not based on euros, but on love. Marianne's heart ached with relief. For years she had felt alone in her struggle, believing she was weak, foolish, unloved. Now, sitting with Eleanor, she realized she was not alone. Others had walked this path. Others had survived. That night, for the first time in years, she went to bed without worrying about Jonas and Sophia's rent, groceries, or demands. She thought only of herself, her future, her peace, her freedom. And she slept deeply, untroubled, as if her body finally believed she was safe. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, tense phone calls, and sleepless nights. Marianne Keller had hoped that canceling the transfers, changing the locks, and installing cameras would be enough. But Jonas and Sophia were not done. They were wounded, furious, and determined to regain control. One morning, a heavy envelope arrived at Marianne's apartment. Inside was a summons. Her son, her own flesh and blood, was petitioning the court to declare her legally incompetent. If successful, Jonas and Sophia would become her guardians, gaining total control over her finances, property, and medical decisions. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. She held the paper in her trembling hands, reading the words again and again, unable to believe them. Jonas was not just ungrateful, he was trying to erase her autonomy completely. When she brought the papers to Herr Bauer, her lawyer, his jaw tightened. "This is exactly what I feared. They are trying to strip you of your independence through the courts. But we will fight, and we will win." The days leading up to the hearing were some of the longest of Marianne's life. Jonas and Sophia paraded around the neighborhood, whispering to acquaintances, spinning their story. That Marianne was confused, forgetful, losing touch with reality. Sophia, with her perfect smile, told anyone who would listen that they were only trying to protect her. Lies traveled quickly, and Marianne could feel the weight of gossip in every glance from strangers. But she was not alone. Eleanor, her neighbor, promised to testify. So did Cynthia from the salon, Herr Sommer from the hardware store, and even Herr Vogel, the bank clerk who had processed her endless transfers. Each one had witnessed her clarity, her independence, and the way Jonas and Sophia had drained her. Their support gave her strength. Finally, the day arrived. The courthouse loomed large and cold, its stone walls intimidating. Marianne clutched the arm of Herr Bauer as they entered. Inside, Jonas and Sophia were already seated with their lawyer. Sophia wore black, her makeup subtle, her expression solemn, as though she were mourning. Jonas avoided his mother's gaze. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the room to order. "We are here to determine whether Frau Keller is capable of managing her own affairs, or whether guardianship should be assigned." Sophia's lawyer spoke first, painting Marianne as a fragile old woman slipping into confusion. He cited the sudden cancellation of transfers as erratic, the installation of locks and cameras as paranoid, and her refusal to cooperate with her son as evidence of impaired judgment. Marianne's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. How dare they twist her self-protection into madness? Then Sophia took the stand. Her voice trembled with well-practiced emotion. "I love Marianne like my own mother," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "But lately she hasn't been herself. She forgets conversations. She pushes us away. She's paranoid. We're terrified something will happen to her. We only want to keep her safe." Jonas followed, his words colder but calculated. "My mother is stubborn. She doesn't understand finances anymore. She makes reckless decisions. Without our help, she will end up destitute. We just want to protect her from herself." Each life felt like a knife in Marianne's chest. These were the people she had raised and supported. Now they were tearing her apart in public, trying to convince the world she was nothing but a confused old woman. When it was her turn, Marianne rose slowly. The courtroom fell silent. She spoke not with trembling, but with the steel that had been forged in years of sacrifice. "Your Honor," she began, "for 4 years I paid their rent. I covered their bills. I financed their furniture, their car, even their wedding gown. In total, I gave them 40,000 euros. And in return, I was excluded from their wedding. I was told I was not special enough to be there. Does that sound like the behavior of a confused, incapable woman? Or does it sound like the behavior of a mother taken advantage of by her own child and his wife? Her words hung heavy in the air. Jonas shifted uncomfortably. Sophia's face tightened. Then Herr Bauer called the witnesses. Herr Vogel, the bank clerk, testified. Frau Keller always knew exactly what she was doing. I watched her sacrifice for them again and again. She was never confused, only generous. Cynthia from the salon spoke next. She came to me after cutting them off. She was clear, strong, and determined. She told me she finally remembered she deserved to live for herself. Eleanor, her neighbor, choked back tears as she addressed the court. I have seen her suffer in silence for years. I saw the shouting, the manipulation, the way they drained her. But I also saw her stand up for herself. She is not weak. She is not incompetent. She is brave. Piece by piece, the truth was laid bare. Finally, Marianne's doctor testified, confirming that she was of sound mind, with no sign of dementia or cognitive decline. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke. Frau Keller, the evidence is clear. You are competent. You are capable. And you have been subjected to financial exploitation by those who should have been your protectors. The petition for guardianship is denied. Jonas Keller and Sophia Hartmann, consider yourselves warned. Any further attempt to coerce or manipulate Frau Keller will be subject to legal action. Marianne exhaled, a long, shaking breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The gavel struck, and the case was over. Jonas's face was red with fury. Sophia's mask of sweetness had slipped, her eyes blazing with venom. They stormed out without a word, leaving Marianne standing tall, her head high. As she left the courtroom, Eleanor squeezed her hand. You won, Marianne. Not just the case, your freedom. And for the first time in decades, Marianne felt it. Freedom. Not the fragile kind that depends on pleasing others, but the unshakable kind that comes from reclaiming one's dignity. She had faced her abusers in the harsh light of the law. She had been heard. She had been believed. And she had won. When the gavel struck and the judge declared the case closed, Marianne Keller felt as though an invisible chain had fallen from her shoulders. For months she had lived under siege by her son, by her daughter-in-law, by whispers of incompetence. Now, with one decisive ruling, she was free, outside the courthouse. The crisp Vienna air filled her lungs. Eleanor squeezed her hand, and Herr Bauer offered a rare smile. You did it, he said softly. You reclaimed your life. Marianne nodded, though words failed her. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. A new chapter begins the very next week. Marianne put her small apartment on the market. It wasn't just about space, it was about erasing the shadows that clung to those walls. Every corner reminded her of sleepless nights, of fear, of manipulation. She wanted a fresh beginning. Within a month, she had moved into a cozy flat in Vienna's 3rd district. It was smaller, but brighter. Sunlight spilled through large windows, warming her mornings. On the balcony, she placed pots of lavender and geraniums, plants she had once loved but neglected. Now, tending them became a ritual, a symbol of nurturing herself for the first time. Her money, once siphoned away, was now hers again. With Bauer's guidance, she secured her accounts, set a clear budget, and even allowed herself indulgences, something she hadn't done in years. She bought a sturdy pair of walking shoes, a soft wool coat, and a train ticket to Salzburg. The first taste of freedom travel had always been Marianne's dream, something she had postponed again and again for Jonas's needs. Now, She finally boarded a train, her suitcase small but her heart expansive. The alpine scenery rushed past, snow-capped peaks piercing the sky. For the first time in decades, she wasn't traveling to help someone else. She was traveling for herself. In Salzburg, she visited Mozart's birthplace, listened to music that stirred her soul, and strolled through the Mirabelle Gardens. She smiled at strangers, tasted pastries at street cafes, and allowed herself to laugh out loud when she spilled sugar on the table. Nobody judged her. Nobody demanded from her. She was free, giving back on her own terms with her savings no longer bleeding away. Marianne began considering how to use her resources meaningfully. She discovered an organization in Vienna that supported elderly victims of family exploitation. Their stories mirrored hers. Mothers drained by ungrateful children, widows bullied by relatives, grandparents manipulated for pensions. Marianne walked into their office one bright morning, introduced herself, and asked how she could help. She began volunteering once a week, answering phones, comforting those too ashamed to speak, sharing her story when it gave courage. Her contributions didn't stop at time. She donated part of her money to the organization, but this time it wasn't given out of fear or obligation. It was given freely, with dignity. For once, her generosity wasn't exploited, it was honored. Rebuilding connections. Perhaps the sweetest reward came from rebuilding relationships she had long neglected. Cynthia at the salon became more than a stylist. She became a friend, someone Marianne met for lunch and long conversations. Herr Vogel, the banker, would sometimes stop by with fresh pastries and chat about music. Eleanor, her neighbor, often joined her for tea on the balcony, the two women laughing like schoolgirls at silly jokes. Marianne realized that love still existed in her life. It simply hadn't come from where she had expected. She had poured herself out for Jonas and Sophia, believing family was everything. But family, she learned, is not defined by blood. It is defined by respect, by care, by reciprocity. The wound that remained still. There were nights when grief returned. She would sit by the window, looking at the moon, and remember the little boy who once clung to her hand during thunderstorms. She still loved that boy, even if the man he became had wounded her. But instead of drowning in sorrow, she allowed herself to grieve, then let it pass. Jonas had made his choices. Marianne could not control them. What she could control was her own future, and that future would not be written in bitterness. A life reclaimed. In her 70th birthday, Marianne hosted a small gathering in her new flat. Eleanor brought flowers, Cynthia brought cake, and a few volunteers from the organization arrived with laughter and hugs. The apartment filled with warmth, music, and the sound of clinking glasses. As Marianne looked around, tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She had thought her life was over, that betrayal had broken her beyond repair. Yet here she was, surrounded by people who valued her, living a life she had chosen for herself. Later that evening, as the last guest left, Marianne stepped onto her balcony. The city stretched before her, lights twinkling against the night sky. She whispered softly into the air, as though to her late husband, Friedrich. I finally kept your promise. I am living for myself now. The message of freedom. Marianne's journey was far from simple. It had cost her illusions, her money, and the bond with her only child. But what she gained was something far greater. Her freedom, her dignity, and her peace. She knew other women would face the same battles, mothers silenced by guilt, grandmothers drained by greedy children, and to them, she offered her story as proof. It is never too late to reclaim your life. At 70, she was not finished. She was beginning again, and this time, she was free.